Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. And as I noted at the end of last week, unless Conservative MPs decide to keep pushing the issue of Dominic Cummings refusing to acknowledge what he's done and apologise at least, both he and Boris Johnson will think they can draw a line under the saga and move on. However, there's another Cummings-related scandal that's about to be brought back into the public eye once again, at least later this year. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Dominic Cummings did not start being controversial by claiming that visiting a castle is a good substitute for an eye test. Amongst his previous misdemeanours was the case last year when he acted quite outside of his authority in getting armed police to frog march one of Sajid Javid's Treasury aides from Downing Street. Now, the former Chancellor's aide, Sonia Khan, has of course brought a tribunal case against her dismissal, which will include the nature of her dismissal. Now, government lawyers have recently tried to get Dominic Cummings' name removed from the claim on the basis that he was an aide of the Prime Minister, and you know, usually you wouldn't bring other civil servants into a case like this because it's understood that, generally speaking, they're acting on behalf of their minister. Really, the claim should be against their minister. However, on this particular case, it has failed because, well, Dominic Cummings acts for Dominic Cummings. And this has two immediate consequences. First of all, when the tribunal starts to get spicy enough to hit the national media headlines, Dominic Cummings will once again be thrust into the spotlight because he is personally named. Oh, remember that knobhead that thought he was above the rules and had nothing to apologise for? Those rules that meant your gran had to be alone in her final hours? Yeah, that one. Well, it turns out that knobhead also abused his position and got armed police to kick someone out of Downing Street when it had nothing to do with him. And guess what? That was against the rules as well. Not only did he not have the right to dismiss this advisor, as she works for a government minister, but he had absolutely no right to use the police in this way, come what may. In fact, at the time, the Metropolitan Police had to apologise because, you know, what the officer should have done. I mean, you can understand the situation. Dominic Cummings does run government, does run Whitehall. He gave an order to the police officer, you know, obeyed it. But in actual fact, the police officer should have said no, you know, and the Met did have to apologise for that. You know, for the officer actually complying with that order. But secondly, it also means that if the case goes Sonia Khan's way, that Dominic Cummings will be personally liable for any resulting damages, ensuring even more exposure in the national media because, like I say, Dominic Cummings wasn't actually acting on behalf of anyone. He can't claim that he was just an agent of his minister, the Prime Minister in this case. The actions were allegedly entirely his, and so he can't disentangle himself from the case. Of course, you know, this is all Cummings' fault, and I don't just mean for breaking the rules, but for being an out-of-control egomaniac. Normally, shadowy advisors are supposed to stay in the shadows. It's to their benefits and the benefits of their ministers. They're not supposed to be well known. They generally don't really want much of a public profile. Had he heeded this basic principle, nobody would have ever have known about him going to Durham, by the way, in the first place, because nobody would have recognised him. You know, now this won't be happening immediately. The hearing is set for December, but when the time comes, he will have to come forward as a witness. You know, maybe he thinks the rules won't apply to him in that case either. I mean, he has got form on that as well. Remember, he refused to appear before Parliament. Never mind an employment tribunal. He refused to appear before MPs when he was ordered to do so. As a result, he is one of the very few people ever to have been found in contempt of Parliament. Of course, refusing will just add even more spice to the headlines. Remember, the public fury at the moment is centred around the idea that Dominic Cummings thinks that he is above the law, that he doesn't have to follow the rules. This is another case of him not following the rules, and if he doesn't appear in front of the tribunal, do you know what? It's another case of him thinking he's better than us. That is hardly going to improve his standing amongst the public. And he does have form in this as well. He's sort of... technically already lost one tribunal case for bullying behaviour in Whitehall. Didn't end up going that far in the end. So it's not like he's exactly be able to claim previous good character. He wasn't found guilty as such, because in this point it was when he was working for Michael Gove at the Department for Education, and the Department for Education had to pay out the victim before it actually went through the full tribunal. Maybe they'll do so again, or maybe the victim will be having none of it and put principles first and insist that the tribunal runs its course. I hope so. I don't know that will be the case. I don't know whether they'll be in a position to do that. In fact, the report, when I was reading this, noted that even the Prime Minister himself may have to give evidence, because she was dismissed. Dominic Cummings didn't have the authority to dismiss her. Sajid Javid, who was the minister that effectively employed Sonia Khan, didn't want her dismissed. He was apoplectic, in fact, when he found out what had happened, absolutely furious. So at that point, she hadn't technically been dismissed. She'd just been marched out of Downing Street under, well, threatened by a gun, basically, for stick up. And but for her to actually be formally dismissed, Cummings would have had to go on crying to Boris Johnson, who would have had to say, yes, we're doing what Cummings says. So ultimately, it would have been Boris Johnson who actually formally dismissed her. And again, he had no moral right to do that, but he does have the legal right, I suppose. So he may have to give evidence. And there we go, because he is the ultimate authority here. And that authority could only have come from Boris Johnson. It didn't come from Sajid Javid. Boris Johnson was the only person senior enough to overrule the then Chancellor. Chancellor of the Exchequer is the most senior position in government, below the Prime Minister. So assuming that nothing delays the tribunal further, and we know how these things can go, and the government don't successfully pay Khan off, and if I were her, and let's say I were her in her position and minded to be paid off, I'd want a hell of a payout. A hell of a payout. None of your standard year's wages or anything like that. None of that bollocks. And you would be able... It's actually quite tricky, because in theory you'd think you'd be able to hold out for something big, because Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings will be absolutely desperate for this. It's already been reported at the moment. It's not front page news at the moment. But if this goes to tribunal and he has to be called as a witness, you can bet your arse that's going to be on the front pages. They don't want that. They would try to avoid that at all costs. And bear in mind, they don't mind spending public money. It wouldn't be that they'd be paying their own money. It'd be public money they'd be spending. There is a little bit of a tricky part to it, though, in that, this Conservative government did actually put rules in place that limit the amount you're allowed to pay off civil servants. So that actually might prevent them offering a large payout, which is interesting. But also, for an extra little bit of context, the government's COVID response is likely to look even more incompetent at that time as well. So it's a time when, this may be being splashed across the national newspapers. COVID will have run much clearer. We will have had a second wave by then, might be a big one, might have had a third wave by then. And people may also be starting to turn against the hard Brexit, which will also be imminent at the time. And what if this case is delayed a few more weeks into January 2021? They really will be sick to the back teeth of hard Brexit then, once they've actually seen it. It could get very, very spicy indeed. But at the moment, it's just going to be a slow burner. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.